Do you think tasks should be taken out of a sprint after the sprint has started? Yes. I posted a prompt online a few weeks ago. I asked, do you have any questions about Scrum? Ask away and in a comment below, and I'll respond in a new thread. So I got a question, and it goes like this. Do you think tasks should be taken out of a sprint after the sprint has started? Now, I suppose there's a broader question here. Something like, can the tasks of the sprint backlog be modified throughout the sprint? And the answer is yes, if. Now that's a big if. Let's explore that. Let's start with a scenario in which a group whose working agreements include a commitment to try the practice of Scrum, and so there's a Scrum team and their stakeholders. They have a compelling product vision that motivates them, and from that vision they have derived a product goal, like a near-term goal, perhaps a business outcome that they would like to realize in the next few months. And they expect this business outcome will move them toward their product vision. Imagine the team has gathered for sprint planning and they negotiate a sprint goal. And with some refinement, there's a portion of the product backlog that relates to that sprint goal. And the developers have some confidence that they can turn that portion of the product backlog into releasable functionality within the sprint. Now, next in sprint planning, the team will talk about how to achieve that sprint goal. And they're likely to write down a few tasks that need doing. And I'm talking about technical steps, chores, procedures, other activities that the developers will need to conduct to achieve the sprint goal. Now, are those the tasks in the original question? And if so, yes, it's perfectly acceptable that the developers can modify those tasks of their sprint backlog. Even after the sprint has started, they can modify the sprint backlog. They can add and remove tasks as necessary, and they can adapt their plan and activities to achieve the sprint goal. In mid-sprint, the developers might discover a different way to implement a part of the functionality that they had planned to build within the sprint. And the developers are allowed, in fact, I expect that they will adapt their sprint backlog to achieve the best possible outcome related to the sprint goal. Just like a basketball team adjusts their positions on the court, the guitarist will tune their guitar while playing a song, and I expect developers in a Scrum team to adapt within the sprint, especially if the sprint goal is in jeopardy. Hey, the sprint goal is at risk. What are we going to do about that? What tasks must we change or remove to improve our odds of achieving the sprint goal? You see, Scrum supports continuous improvement, but it also supports discontinuous improvement. It's possible that the developers of the Scrum team may discover a radically new approach to achieve part of the sprint backlog. And there's no reason that they shouldn't adapt and discuss it and change their sprint backlog on the fly to exploit that new implementation option. I'll share an analogy, and I hope that you can relate. Let's imagine a Scrum team whose expertise is the creation of custom storybooks. And now let's imagine that this Scrum team has a new client, and their client will commission the creation of a collection of classic fairy tales. Maybe their client is like the Museum of English Literature or something. This isn't just any storybook. The stories are intended for young children, but the audience includes all the visitors of the museum, present and future. It'll be like its own display case. It's going to be grand, impressive, large enough that a friendly giant can hold the book on their lap and read it for a room full of kids. And the kids can see the illustrations and the text from across the room. Now, what I've just provided you is a vision, a product vision, such as it is. But let's imagine that the Scrum team and the stakeholders derive a product goal from that vision. They want to validate some of the assumptions that they've made about the architecture and style of the book. It's important that the team decides on a binding. Will it be stitches or coil or glue? And what does the cover look like? Is it hardcover made of wood or plastic or leather? What type of paper will be used? Will they use metal substrate or acrylic for etching? Perhaps a near-term product goal, and everyone agrees that they produce one fairy tale in a hardcover format. Everyone can then get a sense of the eventual outcome. They can give their feedback about those crucial factors of the product: architecture, style. So now let's imagine that this Scrum team, in their next sprint planning event, they negotiate a sprint goal together. It's decided that they'll strive to achieve a few pages of a hardcover bound storybook featuring the big bad wolf. So many stories have a big bad wolf. They've got to get this design just right. So the team will use this sprint to produce and test multiple designs that engage the audience and also please the client. And so they select from the product backlog a few items that relate to this sprint goal, and they emphasize the wolf character. One of the product backlog items says, "Scary wolf on front cover." Another one says, "Wolf comes down the chimney and dies in a pot of boiling water," from the Three Little Pigs. Another item says, "Wolf dressed as grandmother. Little Red Riding Hood notices the large teeth." As I describe these product backlog items, you can imagine whole pages of the storybook, the images, perhaps the text. And the developers can imagine it too. So remember, they're still in sprint planning in our little scenario. And they write down a few activities that need doing. Draw a few wolf designs. Get feedback from school children. Print the relevant text. Illustrate the scene. Prepare the mask and substrate for etching. Bind the page into a book. 3D print the front cover in polymer. Now let's get back to the earlier question. Do I think that tasks can be modified in the middle of a sprint? Yes, I do. For example, let's imagine the team is now in the middle of their sprint. They've tested a few wolf designs at a nearby school, and they had planned to 3D print the front cover. But with a few days remaining in the sprint, someone proposes that they try a new technique with stainless steel. It'll last longer than polymer and it won't discolor. It'll be perfect for a museum. One of the team members proposes that they laser cut the stainless steel, and the team is pretty excited to try this. So in the next daily scrum, they adjust the tasks in their sprint backlog. They remove all the tasks that were related to the polymer 3D printing, and they add new tasks that say things like, prepare the cover image for the fabricator, cut the steel plate, make hinge. A book with a metal cover needs a cool hinge, right? Now, notice the sprint goal hasn't changed. They're still going to produce a few pages of the hardcover storybook featuring the big bad wolf. The product backlog items that they intend to produce they've not changed either. They're still going to produce the scary wolf on the front cover, the wolf comes down the chimney, wolf as grandmother, big teeth, etc. You get the idea. But the sprint tasks have changed as they adapted their implementation. Now let me address a common related problem. In a scenario where a product backlog item, product backlog items are just merely dragged into a sprint and ta-da, there's our sprint plan. First, I see this often and I sense that there's a misunderstanding about the nature and purpose of the sprint backlog. Second, it's apparent that if they were to take out one of those items, well, then the scope of the sprint and the sprint goal will have changed. This is a suboptimal scenario. Digital tools lend themselves to this pitfall. So perhaps to clarify and conclude, 1, product backlog items are different than the tasks of the sprint backlog. Like in the exact same way that menu items in a restaurant are different than the technical tasks, procedures, steps conducted by the chef in the kitchen. As a customer in the restaurant, I see Eggs Benedict. But the kitchen staff, they convert that into tasks. Prepare the ingredients, mix the hollandaise, cook the eggs, plate the dish, deliver it to my table. Those are the tasks. Now, that's a helpful distinction to make, I think, between the nature and content of the product backlog and the nature and content of the sprint backlog. 2, when we say that the developers of the Scrum team own the sprint backlog, we mean that they're allowed to change the sprint backlog at any time. A sprint backlog is initiated during sprint planning event. The developers modify it throughout the sprint as they tune and adapt their plan to achieve the sprint goal. And then the sprint backlog is destroyed at the end of the sprint, and the cycle repeats. 3, I'd like to hear from you. Please comment below and let me know if your own team operates in a way that matches what I'm saying, or tell me how what you experience is different than what I've described. Thanks for watching.